I think I'm going to Kathmandu. That's really, really where I'm going to. Don't worry, I'm not going to be ruining Bob Seger's song anymore, but I'm just so excited about today because I know I promised we'd never do anything hard like climbing Mount Everest, and we're not. However, we're going to actually go to the base area, not base camp, we're going even lower than that, in Nepal on the same trail and the same trek Mount Everest climbers go on. Today I'll be interviewing Janet Hampeter, who you first met in episode number 6 about her adventures on the El Camino. So I am super excited about this interview today on this episode number 17 of the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks, and we are going to Nepal. Cannot wait. As it turns out, I will actually be hiking in the Himalayas myself in just a few weeks, and I'm actually prepping for my visit to Bhutan. Well, I'll be visiting a festival, their biggest festival, and also doing an amazing hike. So I'll be sure to cover that. It'll be probably late spring, early summer by the time I get that episode out. But anyway, I wanted to ask you, do you think it would be helpful for me to prepare, be free, a video of what I do to prepare for a trip like that, what I pack, all that kind of stuff? It's a lot of work to do, so I want to do it if you want it, but I don't want to go through that if nobody wants to look at it. So if you are interested in seeing how I do prepare for an adventure like that, please send me an email or reach out to me on Facebook or something and let me know what you think. I'd appreciate that. One other thing that came up, I may be blessed with very good genes as far as physical and longevity genes, but I was not blessed with good teeth genes. And the last year I've had 3 issues with tooth pain, even though I haven't had a cavity in 30 years. And it turns out I need a crown again, and they've gotten awfully expensive since the last time I bought one. And so I investigated a little bit about medical tourism. And it turns out that Hungary, or Budapest, is like the capital of dental care in Europe. So I'm seriously thinking about going to Budapest and having all these back teeth I have that have fillings from my youth capped so that I don't have this continual problem, because it looks like this is going to be my future anyway. And it's about a third of the price, and it will pay for the trip. The savings will pay for the trip. Hungary has a beautiful long-distance trail called the Blue Trail that I think while I'm there, I would do maybe 10 to 14 days of a pretty section of that trail as long as I'm there. It'll give me a chance to look at the landscape and meet the people of Hungary, a country I've never been to. I would say I'm leading pretty heavily on doing this. So if any of you all have ever done any kind of medical tourism and have some stories to share, I'd love to hear them. Please send me an email at kit@activetraveladventures.com, or if you have an opinion on what I'm doing or considering doing, I'd like to hear that as well. So let's get back to the Himalaya Mountains, but on the other side, over in Nepal, where we're going to be going into the Everest region. First, you fly into Kathmandu, which I'm sure we've all heard about, both from the Bob Seger song that I mangled at the beginning of this show, as well as just the aura, mystery, and mystique about Kathmandu. So you spend a couple days there, and then you fly into the airport Lukla, which Janet will tell us about in the interview, which is just a crazy airport that is small. They have a very limited runway because of the mountains, so you have to have super skilled pilots bringing in these small planes, and it's so heavily trafficked now that it's just this symphony of planes in and out, in and out. The air traffic controller there must have nerves of steel, and I'm sure needs a stiff drink at the end of his or her shift. I'll put a video on that's on YouTube that is it's just nonstop planes in and out and just shuffling in this little teeny tiny area that they have with which to work. So anyways, you fly into Lukla, and then you hike up into the Sagarmatha National Park. And in this park, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, is where you'll find Mount Everest and all sorts of other beautiful mountains. And like I said, we are going to be down even lower than base camp. The base camp is at about 18,000 feet, which is roughly 5,400 meters, versus the highest mountain in the world, Mount Everest, which is at about 29,000 feet or about 8,800 meters. So we're going to be down way, way lower than that at around 12,500 feet. Really not even quite that high, which is not even 3,800 meters. And the cool thing is there's only one trail. So you're on the trail with everybody. You're on the trail with the people that are actually going to climb Mount Everest, with all the people that are going to base camp, with the people that are doing like ourselves, just doing the regular trek among the villages en route towards the base camp in Everest. And it's also the community villages. So you're going through all these little villages where the people in Nepal are living and working, and they're transporting everything. Everything's got to go on this trail. So you've got this cacophony of people and yaks and the mountains and the Tibetan culture, the Sherpa people, all mixed on this one little stretch of land going from Lukla up to Mount Everest. Super cool. In 1953, Sir Edmund Hillary and Nepalese Sherpa mountaineer Tenzing Norgay became the first ones to be certified to reach the top. There is some mystery, though. In 1924, George Mallory and Andres Irvine may have beat him to the punch. They were last seen really, really high up, but then the clouds covered their further ascent, and then they disappeared. And nobody knew what happened to them. Well, they knew they died, but they didn't know if they'd made it. They never knew whether they made it to the top. And in 1999, at an altitude of 26,755, they found Mr. Mallory's body. But they don't know whether they made it to the top and perished on the way down or not. So that remains the mystery. So therefore, Hillary is the confirmed first ascent. He became so enamored with the Sherpa people of the area that he devoted much of the rest of his life to building schools and hospitals in Nepal. And while you're there, you may want to stop in and visit some of the schools. You'll also hear the warmth that Janet has for the Sherpa people too. They're just so loving and hospitable and friendly, and I just cannot wait to go. I'm just so excited because I thought this trip was going to be out of my reach, and now I find out through Janet, hey, I can do this. And if I can do it, of course, you can do it. But enough of me yapping. Let's get Janet Hampeter on and let her teach us all about trekking in the Everest region, but at the lower altitudes. Here's my conversation with Janet. Janet, you're one of the most well-traveled people I know. About roughly how many countries have you been to so far?
Well, over my lifetime, I'm at 80.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. It's like, wow, I can't quite believe it myself.
That's incredible. Now, I believe you had ranked your Nepal trip as favorite trips ever. How, in that list of 80, about where would that Nepal fit for you?
It's hard. People always ask, what's your favorite trip? And honestly, so many of the ones I've been taking the last maybe 17 years where I've gotten more adventurous with my travel, my more exotic travel. Many of them are just really kind of trips of a lifetime. But without question, the Nepal trek is incredibly special. I would certainly, I don't think I could even rank my favorite, but I would definitely say it's in my top 5. It really is an amazing experience I will never forget.
That also coincides. I've not been to Nepal myself, but Rosemary Burris, who was interviewed in episode number 5 about her Sweden hike on the Kungsleden Trail, also a well-traveled hiker, said that Nepal was in her top as well. And she's actually going to repeat that trip again this year. So we all have unlimited time and money. What is it about Nepal that makes even people that are seasoned travelers go back and repeat an adventure that they've done before when there's so many places and we're never going to be able to see everything in the whole world? What is it about Nepal?
I think it's when the trek that I took up into the Everest region or the Khumbu region, I think you've got that mixture of incredible, beautiful mountain scenery. And secondly, you've got the Nepalese people. And in that region, you're talking about the Sherpa people of the ethnic Sherpa. And they are incredibly special. And they're beautiful villages and that whole lifestyle. It's one of the most exotic and one of the most heartfelt experiences. So it's really that mixture of the culture of the Sherpa people and the scenery you're surrounded by, and just the fact that you're trekking through this amazing territory, that you're essentially on the Everest Highway, which is the only road that leads up into this region. You're trekking along with the locals that are moving up their supplies to their main town. So it's a mixture of all of those.
When you say Sherpa, I always thought of that as basically the porters that help bring the stuff up, but you're saying it as almost a word for the townspeople as well?
Yes, and that's a large misconception. I had that as well. The Sherpa people is an ethnic group called Sherpas. They're mountain people, and they I looked it up. They came from the Tibetan region about 4 centuries ago and have moved into different regions. And so very much the Everest region is filled with, it's pretty much all the Sherpa people. And over the centuries, they are just mountain people, and they've acclimated so well. So when the trekkers and mountain climbers came into the region to hike and to actually mountain climb Mount Everest, they used the local Sherpa people as their guides and their porters and the ones that really knew what they were doing. And so over those years, it became synonymous that the Sherpas are just essentially your porters. So it really is, Sherpa could be a non-capital S, but when you're really talking capital S Sherpa, it is actually the Sherpa people. And they're Tibetan, they bring the Tibetan Buddhist religion. So they're very, very devout Buddhists. So you have that whole Buddhist culture. And it looks like when I have been to Tibet in the past, which I loved, and being back in the Everest region in the Sherpa Buddhist world, I felt like I was back in Tibet. So that makes it incredibly special. You've got the monasteries, prayer wheels, prayer stones all along, prayer flags. That's another element that makes it very, very special.
Very cool. Can you give us a brief overview of your trip?
Yes, the core trip was essentially what I would call the Nepal trek. It was 2 weeks, and that was essentially, you would say, 14 days, and 4 of the days are spent in Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal, which is where you fly in and out of. And the trip had kind of 2 days at the beginning in Kathmandu, 2 days at the end, and then the middle section of 9 days was the actual Nepal trek, where we were then trekking up into the Everest region.
Tell us about the trail itself.
What I'll say is the exciting piece is to get up in there, you need to fly out of Kathmandu, which is in the Kathmandu Valley. It's about a 35-minute flight from Kathmandu up to the town of Lukla, and that's Lukla. And that is the gateway to the whole Everest region. And that's really the last place where there's smaller airplanes, but regular airplanes can fly into Lukla. And that's where all the trekkers begin, whether you're going up Mount Everest to base camp, or you're actually doing a mountain climb into Everest, or if you're just doing basic trekking, everyone starts in Lukla. And that's where you then follow the one trail that goes up and up into the main town of Namche Bazaar. And that is what they call the Everest Highway.
So is the Everest Trail a trail, or tell us about that?
No, it's a trail. It is an absolute trail. It's a regular trekking trail that goes through, you start kind of lowland. I mean, you fly into Lukla, which is at 86,000 feet. So it is a mountain town that's basically on the side of a mountain, and you land at the airport. And then from there, everything that needs to get up it takes about a 2-day trek up to the main town of Namche, and you're on a basic trail that's going through kind of lowland terrace farmlands, and then you're going along riverbeds in through river valleys, and then you start to climb up the mountains through beautiful forests. And once you arrive at Namche Bazaar 2 days later, which is the main huge, it's like 1,500 population, that is the main town of the whole area. It's market town. And anything that needs to get to Namche Bazaar or any of the villages along the way or beyond has to be carried by porters, by human porters or pack animals on this basic hiking trail that leads you up. So that's what makes it amazing. There are no roads in. What I will say, there is a small little airport that is above Namche Bazaar at about another 1,000 feet above. It's at about 12,500 feet. And that is a small little airstrip, no scheduled service, and occasionally a small fixed wing plane because it's a short takeoff and landing airport, and occasionally helicopters. But pretty much most everybody you have to fly into Lukla. And at that point, it's a hiking trail. And it's just one hiking trail that goes all the way up.
Now, are you doing this as a group tour, or tell us a little bit about your travel configuration?
I had a group of 12 people. I put this together because it has been a dream of mine to trek in Nepal for almost 20 years, 25 years before I did that, because that was back when I was a travel agent. I remember researching a Nepal trek for a client. And I don't even know if he ended up going, but I found this really great trek, which was essentially kind of similar to what I took. And I love the fact that it was trekking up into the Everest region, that it was going through beautiful small villages. You got a mixture of both the mountains and the cultural scenery, but that it wasn't going all the way to Everest Base Camp, which is too far and too high, which I can tell you about in a minute. And so once I saw that trip, I logged it away in my mind and said, someday I want to do that. And so finally that someday came, because I knew that I wanted to do it before I got too much older, and finally started putting the trip together, found the right person to take us, assembled a group of my friends. There ended up being 12 of us. And at that point, our average age was about 55. And I worked with Gary Scott, who is Aussie, an Australian living in America, who's done lots of Nepal treks over many years, had done a lot of mountain climbing. And I happened to meet him personally as I was planning the trip. I was looking at an REI possible Nepal trek and met Gary. And after talking with him, I went, okay, he's the man. So he essentially put the trip together for us. So he was our kind of Western guide, and then he assembled the whole team in Nepal of the Sherpa guides and the Sherpa porters for us. So it was our group of 12 men and women, half from San Diego and half from Hawaii.
I should note that Gary is no longer guiding in Nepal, but I do have my recommendations for you in the travel planners that you can download for free or on the website. Tell us about the accommodations. Are you staying in a lodge or are you camping?
Great question. Back when I had first researched the trip many years ago, the only options were camping. And I wasn't that crazy about camping for like 9 days, way up in the altitude where it could be cold. So by the time I was just several years ago, started researching the trip to really actually start to want to take it. What is great is that more and more now online through all of the main towns up into that area, there are now trucker lodges, and all of these lodges of varying degrees of quality, but each place has options where you can stay, where you actually now have a roof over your head, a room you can sleep in, sometimes a bathroom in the room, sometimes the bathroom down the hall, and your meals served, and you don't have to be camping. So that has really made a huge difference in the trekking industry in the last several years now with these nice kind of Sherpa lodges. Because in the past, it used to be really the local tea houses that were very, very smoky, marginal, and pretty minimal. So the new lodges are certainly not luxury, but they're very acceptable. And it's a great alternative to camping. And so the majority, I think, trekkers now stay in different types of lodges.
Tell us about the altitude and how you get acclimated.
As you know, Kit, when you're trekking and you're trekking at altitudes, the altitudes make such a difference. And suddenly these numbers that didn't mean much now become very important. So as I mentioned, you're in Kathmandu, kind of lowland. And so you fly into Lukla at that 8,600 feet. And then over the next 2 days, you work your way up to Namche Bazaar, as I mentioned, the main town. And that's at about 11,500 feet. And my trip never went over 13,000. And the majority of our 9 days, once we got up to Namche, the majority of our time in that area, we did different hikes to different places. We were generally between 11,500 and 12,500 feet. So we all did pretty good. The good part about that tough kind of 2 days from Lukla up to Namche is that you have a couple days to start to begin your acclimatization so that you can start to have your body live more comfortably at 11,500 and 12,000 feet. I would say that we all did pretty good. Certainly some of the group would feel a little bit of altitude issues, the headaches or the rapid heartbeats and a little bit of fatigue, but nothing bad. And no one had real major issues because I think that's still a low enough altitude, unless someone's incredibly sensitive to, it's not an altitude that's going to cause a lot of problems.
Do you recommend that somebody find out their altitude aptitude, for lack of a better phrase, before they go on an adventure like this? Because once they start, you're kind of committed.
That's a great question. Yes and no. Sometimes as a San Diego woman, I'm a sea level girl, but I had been blessed over the years with some previous trips. I actually, in 2001, I had done a Mount Whitney hike, which was up to 14,500, which is my highest ever and probably will be my highest ever record. And I luckily did really well with that. And then I've been in, Machu Picchu and Cusco, and those areas have been at 12,000 feet. Tibet was 12,000 feet. So I've had some travels in the past. They may not have necessarily been treks, but that I kind of knew that I could handle altitude. But as I'm sure you know, altitude sickness has no preferences. You could have two people on a trip, one incredibly fit and one who's not so fit. And it could be the fit person who ends up having the altitude problem. Or you could not have had a problem in the past at that altitude, and maybe this time you do. So there's no guarantees, but I think if someone's never been probably over 10,000 feet, it's probably good to at least, have an experience, whether they go to Colorado or go somewhere where they just test themselves to see how they do at altitude for several days, just to at least have that confidence. I think if they are do pretty well at 10,000 after they've had a chance to spend a couple days and gradually acclimatize, then they should probably be okay. Last thing I will say is on the Nepal trek, the first couple days are the tough ones. Again, when you're trekking from Lukla up to Namche, where that's the biggest altitude gain from about 86 up to 11.5. So you've got about a 3,000 foot elevation gain over those 2 days. And so I think every trekking company does is you're generally, once you arrive in Namche Bazaar, which is such a great place, you'll generally spend 2 nights. And so you have your arrival day where you're trekking in, but then the second day is a relaxation or a kind of a rest day. And then you can explore the town, or groups may do a small day hike for an hour or two, but they kind of have it be a day where they're letting the body kind of catch up to the altitude. And that seems to work pretty well.
How much actual hiking do you do on any given day?
I looked back at our hike, and we averaged, it's not outrageous, we averaged about, the actual trekking part of a day, it averaged to be about 4.5 hours per day. And generally there was, you start off in the morning, of course, relatively early, not outrageous. And generally we would stop for lunch, an early lunch somewhere in the middle, and break up the trek and have a chance to rest. It didn't seem too bad. Now, the tough day that I mentioned is really the longest one, and that is from Lukla. We traveled our first day. We flew into Lukla in the airport and then hiked that around midday down to our first stop, where we spent the night in a place called Phakding. And then the next day, so that's a fairly easy hike because you actually go down a little bit. You actually lose some altitude. And then the next day is when that's the long hike from Phakding up to Namche. And that ended up being a day that was 6 hours, even though it was only 4.5 miles. It took us 6 hours. And the first half of it is through gorgeous river valleys. You're crossing over the rivers on these metal suspension bridges, which I have a fear of heights, and I don't like looking on drop-offs down through metal slats that aren't filled in. So I had to have my friends sort of help me over the suspension bridges. I had to hold onto their backpack and not look down. So by the end of the trip, I got better at doing that by myself. But that was, for me, the little scariest part. But the bridges are solid, so it wasn't like anything could happen to me. It's my own little kind of fears. But once we reached the halfway point of that trek on day 2, we stopped for our lunch and then began what they call the Namche Hill. And Namche is Namche, the Namche Hill, getting up to Namche Bazaar. And that's wild. That is a very steep and hill that takes you up, and that took us 3 hours. So if anything, that's the most rigorous part of, in a way, the particular trek that I did. But once you get up to Namche, then, you've made it, and the worst of the real hill climbing is over. And it's such great, beautiful scenery all along the way that it wasn't too brutal. It was really fun and always gorgeous. And when you're with a trekking group, you're always cheering each other on. So it was a really great accomplishment. So that was our longest day of 6 hours, but generally it was more like in the 4.5 hour range.
Tell us about Namche Bazaar and that whole area.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I love, love, love Namche Bazaar. I just, we had 2 days there at the beginning, and then we had one day back towards the end of the trip. So I've had 3 nights there. I could go back there in a flash. I'm not sure I want to hike back in, but it is this big Sherpa mountain village that is the hub of the whole Everest region. So you've got all the locals with their daily life, with their marketplaces, selling their produce, selling their yaks. Yak trains are coming through the middle of town from farther villages, up the trail. You've got kind of the local life, and then you've got the whole international trekking community kind of superimposed on top of it. And so even though the town might only have 1,500 population, it's filled with trekkers of all types. There's the trekkers like me. that are the more easy type trekkers. And then you've got the serious folks that are heading all the way up to Everest Base Camp, and some maybe even leaving to go on a real Everest climbing expedition. So there's a whole huge feel of this trekking world and this excitement, and people from, you're meeting trekkers from all around the world, and everybody's excited and nervous. And the community, the town itself, of course, has then built up all these services to serve us trekkers. So you've got cool restaurants and cafes, you've got bars, you've got German style bakeries, you've got trekking supply shops. There's a fabulous, and it's still there. I Googled because I was trekking several years ago in April, and I checked last night. And in fact, the bar is still going strong. It's called the Liquid Bar. And it is the place, it's the happening place with, all this sort of trekking, international mountain climbing, pictures all over the wall. This is where everybody gathers to have their drinks. And what's great is they also show movies. And so 2 different nights we went there to see movies. We sat there with our drinks, eating popcorn and watching Everest themed type movies, including the one Into Thin Air, that great, movie. So there's just a lot there's internet cafes, coffee shops. So it's this incredible international trekking vibe mixed on top of this beautiful Buddhist culture. And they have a wonderful monastery there, which we visited, got to meet the local resident monks. So you've got a real combination of things to do in Namche to keep you busy and just entertained.
I'm curious about the interactions between the people. Do the locals hang out with the trekkers? Do the trekkers hang out with the climbers? Or do people just stay in their own individual little cliques?
I think it depends on the time of year you're there. We definitely met other trekkers, but they were more trekkers like me, or that maybe were going on to Everest Base Camp just to see it, but not to actually do climbing. We didn't actually come across any mountain climbing expeditions. Generally, they're probably going to hit Namche Bazaar, maybe spend one night at most, and then they're heading off down the trail to continue up to Everest Base Camp. So we didn't actually get to meet any official mountain climbers, just other trekkers. So there wasn't a feeling of this separation.
Tell us about the Sherpa people.
Nope. What you get, that's one of the reasons we fall, us Nepal trekkers, up in the Everest region. I think other parts of Nepal are great too, but in the Everest region, we all fall in love with the local Sherpa people because they are so warm, friendly, open, engaging. There is no separation. It feels like one big kind of a love fest. So very gracious, whether they're the ones running your hotels or even in the marketplace. When I went to go to see the Saturday market and take pictures of the local women selling their lettuce and carrots, sometimes some of them are a little bit shy, but they're sweet and they smile and they're happy to have their picture taken. And, they may not speak English. When you're dealing with the folks in Namche that are dealing with trekkers, then English, of course, is your international language, and they're going to be speaking English. But then some of the other Sherpa people that are the more villagers or maybe the farmers, they may not necessarily speak English because that's not their language. But no, there was definitely not a separation, and everyone was just so friendly, and they're fun-loving, they're a resilient people, they're strong, they're tough. You always hear the stories, whether it's a trekking group like ours or then the mountain climbers that go to Everest that have their Sherpa team of porters and guides that are with them for a couple months at a time. They truly fall in love with their Sherpa team, that these people become like family. So there's something incredibly special about them. Actually, what I will mention is when Gary, our overall tour leader, put together our trip, he worked with his local contact in Kathmandu, he's worked with for years, who assembled the Sherpa team. And so we met them when we flew into Lukla, the town. That's where our Sherpa team was waiting for us. And we had 4 guides and 7 porters. And our 4 guides, 2 of them was a husband and wife, Pemba and Nima, that Gary's been with on many, many expeditions. So he knew them very well, hadn't seen them in a couple of years. So it's this incredible reunion of dear, dear friends that have been together for many years. And as on part of our trek, they live in a town called Kunde, north of Namche Bazaar. And one day as our our day trek was traveling through their town, they invited us, Pemba and Nima invited us to stop at their home, and they served us lunch, and we got to see how they lived, and it was just so special. So there's that incredible gracious hospitality that is really part of the Sherpa people.
What was your first impression of the landscape when you got there, and can you describe it for us?
It varies. When you're first, it's kind of before Namche Bazaar and then after. So on the way, as I mentioned, from Lukla, you're in the mountains, and in the town of Lukla, you can see some beautiful mountains in the distance. But then once you start to really travel from Lukla up to Namche, you're heading back into some lowland valleys. So you're just seeing forested mountains kind of on the side, but you're not seeing the big, tall, white-capped mountains really. And all the way up to Namche. Once you start to break out of, as you're doing the Namche Hill, and you start to see the town of Namche above you on the hills, that's where then the mountains really start. And once you get to Namche, which is in the town itself, is built in a bowl. So the houses are on the sides of the hill, and there's actually 1,000-foot elevation gain between the bottom part of the town and the top part of the town. But it's like almost on this own little ridge. And then by that, it is completely surrounded by these beautiful, tall mountain peaks, completely snow covered. And the peaks are all over 20,000, and they're of all different shapes. And that's where the mountain scenery really starts, of what we think about of the Everest region. And from that point, it's all you may have as you're trekking through beautiful kind of woods and some forests until it gets higher up and it gets a little bit starker. But all through that, you've got huge white mountain peaks just peeking out in every direction. So it is absolutely, I'm not a mountain girl, I'm a beach girl, but there is nothing as majestic as those mountains. It's unbelievably beautiful. It's so pristine, and they're so huge, and there's so many of them, and it's incredible.
Speaking of snow-covered mountains, when did you go there, and what advice would you give us regards to weather?
We went in April. When I researched this, of course, what's the word? I don't like to be miserable. And so I always try to plan trips at the optimum weather times. And so for really a Nepal trek, it is going to be kind of your spring and falls. And I think, April, maybe March, April, maybe into early May. Don't exactly count me on. It's around that time frame, because at some point soon after that, then the rainy, real monsoony part starts, when you don't want to be trekking. And then the fall is also a good time, like maybe October-ish. But I had read that maybe October, November, that in fact the skies may be clear during that period, but it's going to maybe be 10 to 15 degrees colder, as a rule, whether that's still the case. So essentially you have a choice of really kind of spring or fall season. Either one's going to be good. I chose the spring because if it was going to be a little bit warmer, I thought I'd go for that. And as for our weather, it was interesting. Worked out perfectly, but we had everything. We had rain, quite a bit. We had snow. We had clear, sunny days. We had cloudy, overcast. We had the full gamut. It was interesting and it's different when you're down in the lower levels. Lukla, those first 2 days, Lukla up to, as you're getting towards Namche, that's more low level. It's a little bit warmer. But once you get up to Namche and you're in that whole mountain region at the higher elevations, then it's definitely more that mountain temps. And I would say we had kind of typical temperatures that generally they tell you in the brochures, and that I think that turned out to be true, that you're generally going to have kind of daytime temperatures between somewhere in the 40s to the mid 60s. And the evenings, the nights and the early mornings, if you get an early morning start, those could be cold down into the 30s. And in fact, at elevation, we had 3 different mornings when we woke up at 3 different places, 3 different towns. We woke up, we went to bed without snow. We woke up in the morning and there was snow covering everything. So it snowed overnight. So it's really a mixture, but what's great about a trek, you already expect this. And so we were actually well dressed, and I don't think we ever felt really cold. So we were dressed for it properly. A lot of times when you're trekking to the days, you actually do have gloves on. Normal treks, when you're in a place where it's 65 degrees, you're not wearing gloves. But those times when it was colder in the 40s, maybe early 50s, you definitely would wear gloves. And more of your trekking gear, and then you would just layer and take it off as the day got warmer. So it was fine, and even the rain wasn't a problem.
On a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being couch potato, 5 being difficult, but not ironically climbing Mount Everest difficult, what would you rate this particular adventure at the elevations that we're talking about today?
I would say what's let me back up to one thing that kind of helps differentiate it. The trek that I took, and that looking at catalogs, REI, and even like Active Adventures, they seem to offer two types of Nepal treks into the Everest region. One is like the one I took. I think they call it like an Everest lodge to lodge trek, which is very typical. 9 days trekking, staying in the, generally below 2,500 feet, which is what I did. Then there's those treks that are a little bit longer. They go to Namche like we did, but then they continue on sort of the next town up, which is spend the night, is a place called Tengbo She, which has got a beautiful monastery. We didn't get that far. It's a little bit higher. And then it continues for several more days all the way up to Everest Base Camp. And as it's getting up to Everest Base Camp, that's exciting to be able to visit base camp and see where all the expeditions start and hang out. But it's a 17,500 foot elevation. So it's a big difference. You're adding the 12,500 to a 17,500. That's another 5,000 feet of elevation gain over a few days. And the landscape gets starker. It's beautiful, I hear. I have not done it, of course. It gets starker, and it gets the places to stay get simpler and simpler and simpler, possibly even camping. And so it's just a much more rugged trip. And so when I say about what the level is, I'm talking about my type of trip, which is an Everest, staying in the Namche Bazaar region at the quote lower altitudes. And for that, I would say the trek might range in a three to 4, maybe on that one tough day, but it's very doable. It's not a technical trek, because again, I don't do technical trekking. That's not my thing. But all of us were fit. Again, we were age 55. I could still do it. I could still do it now, but I would have to train. So every one of us trained a lot. We did a lot of hiking. Us San Diegans did a one-time hike. We went up to a place 2 hours away up in the mountains. We did a hike that took us to 10,000 feet. So we got a teeny bit of altitude, not a lot. But we were all well trained. We had the right hiking boots. So I think if you're well equipped, it's a very doable trek for somebody who's fit and who has trained for it.
What advice would you give folks that would like to do a similar trek as you did?
I would say do it, but I would say that you want to be someone who's at least comfortable hiking. If you've only walk around the block at home in your city and you've never done hiking, I think you would want to take the next baby step up and at least just go out and start doing, hikes around your community and get into trails and that have hills, and that you've got some uneven terrain, and that you're getting yourself built up. And then maybe you go and take a 3-day trek somewhere where you're going to get used to a multi-day trek, so that you build yourself up, so that you've got more confidence in using hiking poles, in being in your hiking boots, and that you're just comfortable out in nature trekking. I mean, it's basically walking, but what I will say, that the 2 days getting up to Namche, even though you're working your way uphill, there was never flats. You were either going up or down. And even if you look at your elevation gains, you had the river and you were crossing the river. Well, you would go up the hill, and then you'd go down, and then you'd cross the river, then you'd go back up, and then you go down. So there's lots of up and down. So you need to be very comfortable with hills, going up and down hills. So I think that kind of training will just help build your body for that type of thing. I think would be very helpful.
Do you have a favorite story you'd like to tell about your adventure?
Yes. Well, gosh, it all was great. One of the things we did special, which I think is not on a normal itinerary, but because of working with Gary, who knew the region so well, he could plan kind of what he wanted to do for our trip. He added a special element, but it's still doable for folks. When you're in the town of Namche Bazaar, you can go up a good day trip as you go up to an airport, the Sihanoukville airport that I think I might have mentioned. It's about 12,500 feet of altitude. It's outside of town, maybe about a 2-hour hike. You can go up to the airport, it's pretty views. And then about another 45 minutes past that, you get yourself to a hotel that's called the Everest View Hotel. It's a beautiful hotel built by the Japanese back in the 70s. They thought they were going to really develop the Japanese market who could fly directly into the Sihanoukville airport at 12,500 feet and go to the hotel. And they found out over time that a lot of their Japanese travelers that went from sea level to 12.5 had major problems with altitude. And so it didn't end up being a very good thing. But they still get people staying there. And we did spend the night there. They've got the hotel's got the most amazing location. It's set on a ridge and it's facing east directly to Mount Everest. And you don't have to stay there like we did. We spent one night. You can also just trek there for the day, go onto their patio and sit there at their cafe and just have a drink or lunch and look down the valley towards Mount Everest 20 miles away. It's amazing, amazing views. And of course, for us, it's the closest view we would have of Mount Everest. One of the challenges of Mount Everest is that that whole valley can often be covered in clouds. And so even though potentially have a view, it's going to be clouded over. And in fact, that day we were trekking into the hotel. We arrived in the afternoon. It was clouded over and we kept praying. We knew we were spending the night. So we thought, well, we have quite a few hours. We have an overnight. We have the next morning. Maybe we'll get lucky. And so we had dinner, still was clouded. About 9:00, all of a sudden it's moonlight out. The clouds opened up and we got about a half an hour view of Mount Everest and Lhotse Peak next to it in the moonlight. And that was like, wow, that was very cool. Well, the next morning, we also kept praying through the night, like, please, may we somehow the clouds part. We wake up in the morning to, the sunrise and there's the view. And that's in fact what happened at 5:40. One of the early birds of the group got up first thing, looked out, the sun hadn't even come up and they saw the skies were clear. So they came pounding on all our doors. We all headed outside 5:40 in the morning with just kind of our pajamas and our jackets over us. And there we have this most gorgeous view of Mount Everest in the clear skies, and it had snowed overnight. So everything was peppered in beautiful, fresh white snow, and it turned out to be Easter morning. So that will always be one of the most magical moments of my life, was being out there Easter morning with fresh snow, with this full-on view of Mount Everest, with the famous plume. You always see the kind of plume of snow that's blowing off the top of the peak. And I think that's probably a photo I've sent you, and I know you'll be sharing on your website. And in fact, I've written a blog post about my Easter morning surprise at Mount Everest. So that was a very, very special moment for us.
I'll be sure to put a link to that blog post on the webpage for today's episode. And Jen, if you would please, for those that may not have listened to our interview with you on episode number 6 about your adventure on the El Camino in Spain, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, thank you. Okay. Yeah, again, my name's Janet, and so I always love to travel. I've had different careers, and I finally decided a couple of years ago that it was time to really make my travel writing, my travel photography be my main avocation. And so I started Planet Janet Travels, a travel blog to kind of inspire, educate, inform, and hopefully encourage others to get out and travel even more of the world. I know many people travel a lot, and it's about getting out and traveling to new parts of the world that you haven't done, maybe trips that are a little bit more adventurous, which is, of course, Kit, what you do so well. And so I've been able to add more and more kind of exotic trips, both cultural and physical adventures that are not crazy stuff. And so I love to write about that. So that's on my blog posts, just encouraging people to get out, particularly those that are, 50 plus, that we're still young enough, healthy enough, but we got to be doing this kind of travel now rather than wait 20 years when maybe our body won't cooperate so much. So that's what I do with my Planet Janet Travels.
I'll put links on how to reach out to Janet on her blog or her social tags at activetraveladventures.com/Nepal or /17. I went back and put the episode number as a short link to each of the episodes in the past. So if you know the episode number, you can always just do activetraveladventures.com / whatever the episode number. That'll get you to there. And also, you may not remember the exact keyword, but like Costa Rica / Costa Rica, this one / Nepal. So you can guess a little bit. But regardless, if you know one of the two, you'll get there. If not, just go to the directory page on the activetraveladventures.com website and you can find all the information. Janet, is there anything I should have asked you that I forgot to ask you?
Yeah, let me add one thing that's actually quite fun, and it's pretty. I'll send you a link. We talked about, of course, you fly into the town of Lukla. What I didn't mention is that it's one of the most amazing experiences you will have ever done, because it is listed as one of the world's most extreme airports for good reason. This Lukla is a mountain. It's basically a town set in the mountainside, and so when you fly in on your small little 16-passenger turboprop plane, it is one of those what they call a STOL, short takeoff and landing. You fly in, and essentially, as soon as you spy the airport, it's this incredibly short runway that drops off into nothing, and the pilots have to masterfully. These are certified pilots. Not many people can do this kind of airport. You come in and then you drop in quick and you land, because the runway ends in the mountainside. And if you misjudge, you are basically crashing into the mountainside. It's wild, but it's exciting as heck. And I've sent you some pictures, including a video link that I found that does a beautiful job of actually showing what it's like to fly into the Lukla airport. I'm luckily not a nervous flyer, of course, sent lots of prayers, but I had every confidence and I enjoyed every minute of it. It was so exciting. And then it's fun because you're in Lukla, you're watching other planes come in and take off. And it's unlike any airport I've ever seen in my life. It's one of the most exciting things I did on the Nepal trek as well. So not to make people scared, but it's the reality of it. It's a pretty wild ride, but it's small planes and these pilots are experienced. And on that fact is they only fly in good weather. So that is the one challenge with Lukla, is a lot of times you may show up in Kathmandu for your scheduled flight. We happen to fly out at 6:45 in the morning. And luckily the skies were clear, not just in Kathmandu, but they were clear enough in Lukla, which is 35 minutes away, as I mentioned. So we could take off. But many times if the clouds start coming in, flights get canceled, they get postponed, and it may take you many hours before your plane can take off again, or you might even have to wait another day. And that's the same with getting out. So a lot of times the trekkers, you have your departure day out of Lukla, but just in case that airport socked in that day, you may not fly out until the next day. So there's a little bit of all of the operators will tell you there needs to be a little bit of flexibility when it comes to Shamal treks, particularly the flying in and out of the Lukla airport. But it makes a part of the thrill of the adventure, and nothing to worry about. It's just very, very exciting.
That certainly does sound exciting.
It really is. And I'll tell you, that landing was one of my all-time favorite things as well, to be honest. It was just incredible.
Janet gave us a ton of great photos, and I'll also put a link to the video about landing in and out of the Lukla airport on the website at activetraveladventures.com /Nepal or /17. I'm now going to be doing that in future episodes. It'll have the keyword of wherever the adventure is or the episode number. You can find it that way if you're driving or can't write something down. Our thanks to Janet for sharing her adventure to Nepal. I'm sure it's going to be added to a lot of people's bucket list now that we find out it's accessible for a normal hiker like myself. Super excited, Janet. Thank you so much. And also, I'd like to hear from you. Of course, I always like to hear from you anyway, but in particular, after you've listened to this, if you've done any kind of medical tourism and have some opinions on that, I'd love to hear from you. And or if you would like me to do this preparation video of how to prepare for an adventure travel trip, send an email to me at kit@activetraveladventures.com or reach out to me in the Active Travel Adventures Facebook group. I love hearing from you and I love the feedback. I appreciate it so much. I'll be back in 2 weeks with another exciting adventure, and until next time, adventure on.